Hello, I am Maria Pfeiffer, and this is Ars Electronica Home Delivery inside Futurelab. Glad to have you all tuning in. Today with us is Mike Jelinek, a guest lecturer. He's artist, designer, and senior product manager at Wacom. Mike is with us on the screen right beside me, as he's at home in his studio, and he will be talking about sketching and about all the meta aspects about the sketching and design process. It's called meta sketching. We met Mike in a project that's called Future Inc. It is a collaborative research project between Wacom and Ars Electronica Futurelab. And there, in this project, we aim to really investigate and explore the possibilities of creativity from all aspects of ink. We then again touched base during our so-called Monday lectures. Monday lectures are a Futurelab internal educational initiative where we invite fellow designers and researchers and artists to give insights into their research and to talk about what they are up to. And there, in this framework, also Mike was a guest lecturer and did a presentation about his PhD research metasketching that he is doing at the Faculty of Architecture of the Slovak University of Technology in Bratislava. There he really explores the role of visual ideation, design, and cognitive sciences. We found this topic very interesting and we really wanted to share it with all of you out there. And so this is why Mike is with us today. I will also take a seat in the back and listen to this great talk. And if you come up with questions, please feel free to post in the comment section below. And yes, that's basically it. Mike, are you ready?
Yes.
Super.
Yeah. It is always embarrassing to start online, without having the real people in front of me. I really miss the eye contact, and I think so do you guys. So I'm going to talk about the meta sketching. It's the visual ideation in design and context of cognitive sciences. I'm going to explain you later on, but it is, in fact, and shortly said, it is all about what's beyond sketching, what's happening when we sketch, and what happens when we are thinking on paper. But let me introduce myself first and to give you a bit more context why I became so much interested into theoretical and methodology of design, theory and methodology of design. Can I have one more slide, please? So this is a bit of my life journey, because I've started my career as a designer at Skoda, where I discovered quite quickly that I'm more interested into the future, more kind of speculative or conceptual vision of the future. And to put something in production was really interesting for me, but not really convincing me that that's my path. So over the years, I became not just an employee, but also a freelancer for companies like Nike, Hyundai, or Mercedes. Or then I became shortly also an employee of the Design Center Europe in Volkswagen in Potsdam. By the way, I did also a beer tap for Pilsner, so I can call myself a real Czech because I did something for the beer industry in my country. However, one important part of my journey, that part of my life, was an employment in Autodesk. My role was there described something like a solution engineer, which was a crappy name for basically being a demo monkey. That is a person that demonstrates and presents the technologies that has been developed in-house in Autodesk. And my focus was primarily concept design for the automotive. And that kind of strengthened out my interest into the concept design and development of the new ideas. I ended up working for Blur as a freelancer designer. And you could see my work, for example, in a Terminator Dark Fate, where I designed that dropship. So all of these experiences somehow underlined my interest into the ideation, into the process of how ideas are born in a visual form. And mainly the experience in Autodesk was the one that put me into that journey. Because in Autodesk, when I was facing the audience, when I was presenting something, I often got those questions like, or comments like, if I would have your talent, or if I would have your fantasy. And over the time, it became almost an insult for me because I didn't have an answer. I knew that becoming a good artist, good designer, good architect takes time, really an effort and dedication, that you really need to sit on your bum and sketch yourself out and become really efficient in what you are doing. It's not about the talent or fantasy. It's really about practicing and developing those skills. They were kind of hard to describe, and calling them talent or fantasy wasn't sufficient for me. So I became interested into the neuroscience and cognitive psychology, and I was looking for the answers, how the ideas happen, how we can make them happen, how we can support the process of making them, and so on. And that made me to get back to school. I became a student of the Slovak Technical University in Bratislava, where I'm in my second year of my doctorate studies. I'm studying at the design department. And also at the same time, I've been promoting my research online and offline, meeting people. I met the beautiful people at Wacom, where I became a part of their product management team, and where I also play a role as a researcher, and I study the creative workflows. So somehow that journey, that interest into how ideas are born on that question made me a student again and made me an employee of a company at the, let's say, a management or research level instead of being a practical designer. However, none of the practical background has been forgotten. I'm still productive. I'm still drawing and sketching almost daily. And this is a kind of inseparable part of my life. But I want to start. So can we have one more slide, please? Thank you. So I don't think there's a better way to open up a lecture than with a question. On the left side, you see an image of a number of the sketches. Just for your information, those sketches were the results of me being bored at the meeting, me being bored at during the boring call. And these are kind of almost subconscious, unintentional sketches. They started out of nothing, maybe just from a fuzzy feeling, and they became something at the end of the meeting. And I created a lot of those. I basically do have a book right now that is not available for public, but it's a collection of all of these. I call them meeting sketches. And on the right side, there's the graph by Apple Health. That's a tracking of the number of the kilometers I walk every day. And there's a connection between those two images. And I'm going to answer you that question at the end of this presentation. Or if you know the answer, please write it in the comments and the questions as we have them on the YouTube. So next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the sketches, and I presented a couple of the sketches just a minute ago. What is sketch, by the way? Do we really know what the sketch is? I think that the popular opinion would be that the sketch is, something pretty, an image that we create when we, observe a still life, when we observe an apple, and then we draw it on a paper, and we call that sketch. We can call also a sketch, when we prepare something for theater or as a musical piece, or even for mathematics. We kind of concept out something that is vaguely defined, that is somehow still looking for its manifestation. And from all of these definitions of what sketch is, there is one that is really interesting. A sketch is a form of the ideation. And here's the catch. We're not talking about an artifact. We are talking about, in a way, a recording of your thinking process. And this is what we are really looking for. That's the subject matter of the meta-sketching research project. I'm studying the sketch as a form of the ideation. So as you can see, that normally we expect that the result of the sketch is an artifact. It's that beautiful drawing. In our case, the result of the sketching process is not the beautiful sketch, but it's the idea. It's the idea that has somehow formed in our brain, in our mind. Next slide, please. The idea and the ideation is definitely linked to our ability to create, to creativity. Personally, I was trying to stay away from the creativity as an expression, as a technical term, because this term has been heavily abused last many years, and basically everything is creative and everyone is creative, which is true, which is absolutely true. But the way it was positioned, specifically in marketing and so on, it is somehow misleading. So what the neuroscientists say about the creativity? Dr. Jung says that the creative is the production of something both novel and useful. And that's quite interesting because it's not only just the daydreaming, but it's also the execution of that daydream into something tangible. It could be a product, it could be a service, it could be a book, it could be an artwork, but there's something that is useful, usable, desirable, or maybe just one of those. And as you can see here, the part of the creative as a process, there is the moment where the idea is born. And I think that's quite important to remember. Next slide, please. There are a number of the models, scientific models, what creativity is and what's the process of creativity. I don't want to spend too much time on talking about all of those. So I've picked up only two that they are somehow relevant to what I think makes sense. The first one was already penned in 1925 by Graham Walls. By the way, it's quite interesting because the creativity itself wasn't a kind of a serious topic for almost 120 years. Until the end of the last decade of the 19th century, where the psychologists became interested in the creativity as a field of study. It was even mentioned in the literature. Even the ideation sketching wasn't known until the 15th century, and I'll come back to it. So, in 1925, Graham Wallas penned out the theory of the four phases of the creative process. We start with the preparation, or saturation, as he calls it. Then we follow with the incubation, where the idea kind of grows in us, and then we are enlightened, where we kind of have this eureka moment, and then we verify it. It somehow suggests that the creativity is a linear process, going from nothing to something. And I somehow feel that this is misleading, and therefore I prefer the second chosen theory of creativity, which is the creative cognition approach, first published by Finke and the collective and the group of his colleagues. And he called this model Janet-Bloor model, which is basically a stage where you generate the mental representations of the idea, and then you explore them. And it doesn't suggest that it goes from generate to explore. In a way, by the exploration, through the exploration, we generate a number of the new mental representations. And that's how we can explore and come up with the new ideas. So you will see later on how much this model is related to the subject matter of this lecture, the meta sketch. So we're talking about the sketching, and we're talking about the visual ideation, where the sketching definitely belongs. So what is visual ideation? Next slide, please. So here's one of the examples, a really popular example. Visual ideation as part of the design process. There are a number of the design methods, user-centered design, human-centric design, whatever, just name it. All of them somehow use certain representations of the maps of your thinking process. Here you can see some of those visual ideation mapping techniques, from the mind maps up to using the yellow post-it notes. By the way, I do have those things here as well. And these are quite useful and interesting, but that's not our topic today, because we are going to talk mostly about sketching. And I'll give you right now another example. Next slide, please. So this is these are a few screenshots from the TV series by BBC, which is called The Secret of Drawing. This is Dr. Francis Wells. He's a heart surgeon, and he is always, before the surgery, he's sketching out how he will perform that surgery. And that's really interesting, because he never meant to have his drawings, his sketches, to become an artwork that you will frame and hang on the wall. He always used the sketching as a kind of a simulation of the upcoming surgery. And of course, there's a lot of responsibility presented in his work. So he really had to practice. And he was practicing the surgery mentally. And he did it through sketching. It was kind of a lucky and funny coincidence that he was discovered by art theoreticians, and some of his work ended up in the galleries, but it was never meant to end up in a gallery. So with that said, maybe you already realized that sketching is nothing really alien to you, nothing really strange to you. That in a way we are all doing it. That we are all using subconsciously sketching on every piece of paper, on the newspapers, on the bill from the restaurant, on the beer tap. We are sketching on everything to explain our ideas or to help ourselves to think. Can I have the next slide, please? However, this image of sketching still prevails. This is Frank Stephenson, well-known designer who used to be a chief designer of Ferrari. He penned down the X5 BMW. He is a father of the new Mini, and just recently he left the amazing job of being a director of McLaren design. He's an amazing person who still sketches, and he's using sketching as his main tool. So this is how we see that sketching is represented in design process. However, it's the same thing, or sort of the same thing as we saw in the example of Dr. Wells in the previous slide. So let's please go to another slide. Here's what Bill Buxton thinks about sketching. By the way, this is something I really have to recommend here. This is a book by Bill Buxton. The name of the book is Sketching User Experiences. And it's a brilliant book about how sketches contribute to product development, to design development. And I found this book really interesting because Bill Buxton categorizes types of the sketches, types of the drawings, and he explains their individual role. So he describes 5 of the basic types of the design drawings. He goes from sketching to memory drawing, presentation drawing, technical drawing, description drawing. And this is a really nice summary how sketches or drawings contribute to the design process. Yet, there's just one that is really interesting for us. That's a sketch that here serves, as Bill Buxton describes, it serves to the author primarily. It serves to a designer. It is also referred as a thinking drawing or design drawing. That's quite interesting. Somehow that kind of categorization suggests that none of those followings, like the memory drawing, presentation drawing, or technical drawing, can contribute to the ideation process, to the development of the idea. And I think that's not true, because at any of those stages, even when we are producing the description drawing or technical drawing, we are still generating those mental images and we are still exploring them. So I think that it is a categorization or classification working very well when we are looking at the output. But as a role, it's not that simple. Next slide, please. Therefore, I would suggest that we can classify the sketches only in 2 categories, just based on their purpose. There are sketches meant for the ideation. That means they're meant for developing an idea, to find a new solution, new ideas. And they might be intended for the author, or they can be intended even for the external audience, such as our client or manager or colleagues. But in both cases, they involve the addressee, and it doesn't really matter if it's me or you. They need to involve the addressee in the process of forming new ideas, and that's quite important. And then in the second category, it's the communication drawing, communication sketch. That serves just to one purpose, to share the idea, to communicate the idea. So we are focusing on the ideation sketches, and we will talk right now how the ideation fits in the design process, what kind of place it takes. Next slide, please. So this is a simple graph showing or describing the design process in general. It doesn't really matter if it's the design of the automobile or a new PlayStation or an architectural design. It's a new building or ship or spaceship. It starts with the input, always in all cases. We define what we are going to design. If it's a spaceship, then it's a spaceship. Of course, that's the input, design a spaceship. Then we need to process it as an output of a design process. It's not the spaceship itself, but it's the proposal for that spaceship that needs to be understood. And in the process, we recognize, let's say, 3 different tasks. We need to ideate, we need to come up with the idea, Then we need to execute that idea into a form of a proposal, and then potentially share it, that proposal, in the tangible form, let's say in the form of a prototype. That prototype could be a digital prototype, could be a visualization, virtual reality experience, whatever. But as you can see, it's the process from idea, executing the idea, and presenting the idea. So the ideation process really takes an important part of the design process. But how big, how important the ideation process is. Next slide, please. So here's a result of the ongoing online survey. It's not done yet, so there are not too many responses yet, but from this graph, how much time the designers, the creators spend on the ideation throughout the design process, you can clearly see that most of the respondents end up on the right side of the graph. That means they spend a lot of time, the majority of the time, through the design process. So let that sink for a while. It's not how well you draw. It's not how well you create the 3D models. It's not how well you present the 3D presentation or the virtual reality experience. It's how much you spend on the design process, on thinking it through, on the ideation. And this little graph somehow supports that concept, that we spend most of our time through the design process on developing the idea, not the final product. I'm not saying by any means that the rest of the process is unimportant. It is bloody important. We still need to deliver the product. But as the technology develops and we have more computer tools that are helping us to support the execution and communication of the idea, we are off to spend more time on the ideation. We are given that opportunity. Next slide, please. So this is, in a way, the same question, but from a different perspective. The question here was, not all the content is usually shown to a client. How much of such content do you produce during the design process? So on the left side, there's a 0. I don't produce any content that I don't show to a client. That means everything I create will be shown to a client. That's the output. And on the right side, I produce, majority of my work is something that I never show to a client. And again, as you can see, the majority of creators produce a lot of artwork that will never be shown to a client. And it is about 80 or 70% of all the artwork, or all the material you produce through the design process that will be never shown to a client. So this is 80% of your resources, of your energy, mental power, paper that you spend on developing the idea. And I think this is really significant. So let that sink for a while. And meanwhile, let's have a next slide. So this is how typically the ideation fits into a design process. I'm giving you a little example of the development of the concept vehicle, of the automobile, where we start with a simple package, then we develop the concept sketches, the ideation sketches, and then we produce it. But on the right side, and that's the important component of it, you see 5 blue cars. There are 5 different brands. There's a BMW, there's a Mercedes, but there's also Kia or Honda. Or maybe there's something, I don't even know what that is. That might be a Toyota, the last one. But on the first side, they're really hard to untrain eye. They're hard to recognize which one is which. And that should give you a perspective on how much stress the designers really do have these days, how much stress they have on the pressure to create, to come up with a new form language that is recognizable, that is creating that differentiator from the other brands. And because of the limitations coming from the packaging of the car, that means all the EU regulations, not just EU, the global regulations, passive safety, engine location, the brakes, the battery, the power, and everything that influence the architecture of the car so much that there's only a small place left for making it desirable, making it, I don't want to say beautiful, but making it aesthetically appealing. So with that said, the ideation also seems to be quite important. Next slide, please. In a similar manner, we can look at the entertainment design. Here are some examples from the Terminator Dark Fate project that I've been working on. During the first 3 months, I've been asked to do not touch the computer. I've been asked to come up with the illustrations. Of course, I did touch the computer because I couldn't help myself. The digital tools are somehow a natural part of my creative workflow. But my goal was to explore and come up with as many possible ideas as imaginable. And first, it looks like a beautiful, beautiful task to do, a beautiful thing. But after a while, you recognize that you lose the pace. You simply cannot come up constantly with new ideas every day. And you need to do something to be able to do so because you are bloody paid for that. And again, if I was working on that project for 6 or 8 months, I don't remember anymore, the 3 months were just for the exploration. And I think this is crucial. This is really important here. It also illustrates how important the ideations, the kind of a free exploration as a part of the design process, how important it is. So let's go to another slide. So this is one of the last graphs I'm going to show you today. I gave creatives a questions, how do they see the role of the ideation in the future? And, from left, there's no future of the ideation. On the right side, there's a huge increase in the importance of the ideation in the future. And it's quite interesting because almost all of them agreed on that the role of the ideation in the future will increase. Why is that? We have a number of the tools that are helping us to execute the ideas. We can render them, we can model them, we can sculpt them freely. All of those tools are available today. And they will be even better tomorrow. I remember when I started 3D modeling, it was really a tough job to do. Just the training process took a couple of months to master the tool itself. And then it took another year or two to become not dependent on the tool, to become a designer you were before you started to use the tool, to being controlling the tool but not being controlled by the tool. Today it's really as simple. Everyone can do a 3D model instantly, even on your mobile phone today. So it is a common agreement right now that the ideation is a growing topic, and it makes sense to focus on it, to make sense to research what the ideation is and how can we support it. Can I have another slide, please? This is another question. That's the last graph I'm going to show you today. How do you see? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not skipping my slide, so I was one slide later. So, how do you use any ideation technique? And that was kind of a tricky question because I didn't mention it before I gave that question that there are any ideation techniques. So I gave the respondents I gave them the room to find out by themselves. And it's interesting that 71% says, yes, I do know ideation techniques and I use them because they help me. The red triangle shows you, yeah, I know some techniques, but I don't use any of those. And the blue one says, I don't know any ideation techniques. And that's quite interesting. By the way, the survey is still going on, and between the time I've submitted this presentation and now, there are, I think, another dozen of responses. And this red triangle is growing, and the blue one as well. So right now, at this moment, it looks almost like half to half, that people either don't know any ideation techniques, or they know some, but they don't use them. Excuse me. But that's interesting. That's interesting. Because if someone claims that there are ideation techniques and some others, so what's the reality? So let's take a look at some examples. Next slide, please. This is famous Feng Zhu. He's running a school in Singapore, I believe, and he's teaching the whole design process for concept art, specifically for the entertainment industries. And this is his technique called the technique of thumbnails. Basically, these are finger-sized sketches, really small, really tiny. And you produce a lot of them on one single sheet of paper. Why is like that? Because if you don't produce one, but multiple of those objects at the same time. You're not focusing on over-detailing it and overthinking it. You're basically forced to think without going down to details. You're forced to think conceptually. You are forced to explore rather than finish the work. And that's quite important. And this is the example of the visualization, the visual ideation technique. Next slide, please. This is that's a funny one because these are my sketches. I used to travel a lot, specifically when I was working for Autodesk, and I was playing a game when I was sitting in the economy class, in a crowded economy class, and I was bored, and I'm quite big, so I didn't have enough space, and then I started to sketch, so that brought the attention to people even more to me, and I started to play a game with them, so I led them to make that little, it's in red on the left side on the screen, that red scribble. Then I tried to interpret that scribble into something tangible. I'm keen on sci-fi, so it was a spaceship in my case. But that's another technique that is going to be introduced or explained later on today. I'm using the ambiguity, the uncertainty of that red scratch, and I'm using that as an inspiration. And the inspiration is kind of a vague definition. I'm using it as a starting point, and I'm looking into forms. And I'm approaching from my kind of designer standpoint. So I'm making design decisions to convert that scratch into a spaceship. And that's quite important to understand. I'm making design decisions, but I'm ideating at the same time because I'm using the ambiguity as my input. Next slide, please. And here are some more examples. Let's start from the left. It's the blocking technique when you use really simple and primitive geometric forms. The next one, when you focus on the silhouette only, as on the top right one. Then on the left bottom, there's a lovely exercise designed or created by Scott Robertson, who was using the iPhone camera and photo booth application, and he was showing a daily objects to that camera. And use the mirror filter, the symmetry filter, which was mirroring the object. And just based on those symmetrical creations, he could come up with new designs for creatures, but also from spaceships, cars, vehicles, whatever. That's quite interesting as well, because the symmetry is somehow important for our brain as well. It's going to be explained. The next two are extensively using the power of the computers. Scott Robertson calls them texture bombing, or the geometry bombing, where he's using the basic geometry, such as the human body, as in this case, and applying it through the modifiers, different textures of geometries that they are wrapped on the surface. And that produces somehow unclear solutions. But again, those can serve quite well to the ideation process, to develop the idea. So let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to take a sip of the water. Sorry, I had a sore throat. So, this is another page or another classification from Bill Buxton's book of sketching user experiences. Here he defines the parameters of sketching. And remember, we are talking about the ideation sketching. It's not about the technical drawing or persuasive drawing or anything like that. Bill Buxton very well defines that sketch is usually very fast, very inexpensive, disposable. That's quite important here because if you're starting the sketch with the fact that it's going to be ending up somewhere at the wall, you're already restricting yourself. And we will find out later on that it is counterproductive for the idea development. The more we create them, the more of them we create, the better we will be in the ideation, because here the quantity is also defining the quality in the end, because we are not looking for the artistically perfect image, but we are looking for an idea that will be born from the ambiguity, and as it was in other examples that I just showed. So these are like 11 parameters of the ideation sketches. I have to say I agree with all of them. What is really important here is the number 10, which claims that the sketch should suggest and explore rather than conquer. And this is really important because we need to remember that we are not producing an artwork. However, it may become an artwork, but it shouldn't be an intention. But we are producing an idea here, and that's important to remember. However, so we know everything about the ideation sketch. What the ideation sketch should be, what are the techniques of the ideation sketch, but how the ideation sketching actually happens. That's another question, and it's a completely different question. Can I have another slide, please? So let's take a look how the sketching, how the ideation process happened. And that's quite interesting because not just holding a pen, it's not about holding a stylus, it's not about having a blank sheet of paper or the newspaper. It's also about the gestures we do. You know, something is that big. It goes from there to there. And also, we're verbalizing. We say, it's going to be big, and there will be rhythmic kind of placement of the ribs on the grill of the car. Daga, daga, daga. I remember one of my colleagues for the presentation who always produce crazy and funny sounds during the presentation. So think about it. It's not just the sketching. It's also what our body does when we sketch. And the sketching itself seems to be an activity of our body as well. It's not just somehow, you know, a mystical, artistic activity. Next slide, please. Here's another proof. Here are a couple of the designers doing, guess what? They're gesturing. Andre Bijhan van Hooydonk, famous Frank Stephenson, Chris Bengal, well, yeah, just, you know, all of them, I guess, but they all do the gestures. They don't play for the camera. They're explaining a design. They are all performing gestures. Why is that? When we all do that, there must be something important. There must be something we are observing that needs to be discovered, that needs to be explained. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, it's not only designers who find out that we are gesturing and we produce weird sounds. It was also a professor of psychology at Stanford University, Barbara Tursky, who already did those observations in the 80s. She gave a simple task to a couple of the architects where they had to design a new family house. And she was recording them on a VHS tape, what they were doing through the sketching sessions. And they all of them were gesturing, and they all, at a certain moment, they started to talk about what they were doing, even though they were not asked to talk or make gestures. They were all doing it. Because she is a psychologist, she came up with some observations and theories and hypotheses. And she claims that the action gestures are basically a spatial representation of the concepts. They are spatial metaphors, and they're part of our cognitive skills. They are natural to us. And sketching as a form of gesturing is nothing else than just an externalization of the thinking process. And for me, you know, if you remember what was my initial questions, where the ideas are born, I start to understand that this is something that may explain it. We are simply using our bodies to help our brain to come up with the new ideas. Can we go to another slide? And of course, Barbara Tursky wasn't alone in this research. There's a whole movement called embodied cognition as part of the cognitive sciences. And I think this is something that we will see more and more in the future, that we will finally accept that this dualism, that there's a body and the soul, that they're completely separated, that it is not true, that we do have finally the evidence that we're united. Our body and our mind is united in one element. And we think through our bodies because the body is included in our bodies. Our mind is included in our body, and the body is included in our mind. And there were some more things they discovered. An example, the interactions amplify the faults. And what else than interaction to sketching is? We are basically interacting through the pen with the medium. And as George Lakoff says, those interactions, they amplify our thoughts. So that is really cool, but how it applies on the creativity. Next slide, please. There are a number of the possibilities or number of the ideas. How can we connect the creativity with that embodied experiences? We've been speaking about the gestures, how they induce imagery, how they contribute to generation of the mental images. That means the ideas that we will later use and execute them in a tangible form as the art form. But we also need to understand that our mind extends not just to our bodies, but also to the environment. And with the next slide, I will explain what I mean with that. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. Because that's quite interesting. I do have a bit of the background with martial arts. It's been a history. But I've been taught, holding a sword, that I'm not supposed to hold that sword as an object, as a stick, but it should become part of my body. And I always thought it's just a, fairy tale. It's a metaphor that the senseis are using just to force us to be better in the practical exercises. But the thing is that we do have, thanks to the embodied cognition movement in the cognitive psychology, that we really are what we are touching. Because those tools are becoming temporary body parts. We extend our body into those objects. And that is another evidence to me that if we hold a simple object such as the stylus, we extend our body to it. And through that extension, we can interact with the content on a very limited space. And sketching is nothing else than really the interaction on a limited space given by the medium. So just to wrap it up, we are definitely able to generate the thoughts, those mental images by the interaction with the work. And we need our bodies to it. But how the hell we explore them? And it turned out that this is another question. So let's move to another slide. And I promise we are going slowly to the end. We've got like 5 or 6 more slides. So how do we explore? And of course, when we're trying to get an explanation, how do we explore? Let's start with something that shows up as the first thing. We are watching, we are observing something. That's how we explore. We are looking at something. And how do we look? We use our visual perception. And how the visual perception works in our body, we use our sensors. And in that case, these are the eyes. And just when you look at the eyes, you find out that they are far from being perfect. They have so many limitations that we need about 80% of our brain activity to contribute to overall visual perception. So our eyes, through the physical stimulation, through the photons entering our eyes, we are getting about 15 to 20% of the visual perception. Everything else is a construct. Why is that? Just give me a chance to give you a short list of those limitations. We see sharply in a very narrow cone. We also have that blind spot where the optic nerve is connected to our eye. We also blink every once in a while. We don't recognize that. We don't see any of that. We are not conscious about it. Then we have those microsaccades. Those are micro movements of our eyes. And it seems to be quite important to our freedom, to our perception of the space. And there's an interesting thing that it's the nerve conducting velocity. It's interesting because when I clap my hands, the sound we hear enters the brain faster than the visual stimuli, because the sound stimuli are transferred faster than the visual stimuli. There are a number of reasons of that. So think about that. Those two events happening simultaneously are entering your brain both in a different time, yet we perceive them as a simultaneous event. So this is an illustration how much our brain contributes to our visual perception. Next slide, please. There is one other thing. When we look into your brain, thanks to the fMRI, 20 years ago, we could hardly recognize what part of the brain is active for specific actions or events. We could say, this left part is active, or the right part, or the front lobe, the visual cortex is active. That we could do that about 20 years ago. Today, we can almost map the activity to the single neurons. And because of that, we understand better what happens when we perceive visually. And we have learned that there's nothing like visual perception. It's not disconnecting from our perception of time, perception of space. And instead of calling it visual perception, we should rather call it visual spatial perception, because we cannot separate those two things. And boom, there we go. Do you remember thinking, action gestures, embodiments? This is all hardwired in our brain, because we can't separate seeing from being in the body, being in the space, being aware of the space. And that's really important, because all of that is being combined into our experiences thanks to the brain activity. Next slide, please. Of course, this would be a subject matter itself. We can spend lives and hours. Unfortunately, the pubs are closed, so we can't do that. Otherwise, I would love to jump in the car and just drive to Linz and have beers with you guys and talk about these things. Instead of that, I'm going to recommend a fantastic book by David Eagleman. He's got a new one called Livewire these days. I'm recommending that one as well. But particularly in this one, in Incognito, he's talking about our visual perception. And among the other things, he came with one conclusion here. Our brains are always crushing ambiguity into choices. And this is what we designers are doing all the time. We are making conscious choices about what we are going to do next. What will be the final product? What will be the design? What we are designing? So starting with the ambiguity, we can produce the ideas. We can transfer or translate or convert these ideas into products, as well as the definition of the creativity given in the beginning, because we can use our brain to crush the ambiguity into choices. Next slide, please. So this is a little wrap up. Our mind is connected to the body and the environment, and it's not just the observation of a psychology freak somewhere at the university. It's really something that is hardwired in our brain. And in our brain, it's also hardwired that our mind recognizes and discovers the world through our body. It's not just, a mental state. It's the product of our body interaction through that world. And so on and so on. Just to simplify the whole thing, let's go to another slide. And I'm going to read 2 sentences. They somehow sum it all together. We know right now that all of it, it's not just a bold claim. It is really hardwired. And we do have the neuroscientific evidence that it is really like that. That the gestures, small or large, are true connections. And that we also know that our body expands in order to include the external objects we hold or we touch. Next slide, please. And if we put those things together, we got sketching. And you also get the understanding what the meta is on sketching. The sketching is more than just producing the artwork. The sketching really is the way to externalize our thinking process. And it is because that the sketching is nothing else, nothing more, and nothing less than interaction with the physical world through our body. And with that said, I'm going to proceed to a last slide, which finally explains what's the connection between the sketches and the walking pattern I have, the amount of the kilometers I do every day. Because as sketching, as walking, triggers the divergent thinking, which is one of the thinking modes of the brain. And divergent thinking allows your brain to freely explore and generate the variety of the ideas, versus the convergent thinking, that is when you are focused on one specific goal that you are going to deliver, you are going to finish whatever will happen. So sketching and walking, in a way, is the same thing. They both trigger the divergent thinkings. With that said, if you want to come up with a new idea, go for a walk or go sketching. And with the next slide, I'm going to say thank you for your attention. And that's all from me.
That's great. Yeah, that was great. Really very interesting again. Oh, I was just walking into the sources, but they are up in the YouTube channel. Thanks so much. This was really, again, very interesting. And I took a lot of notes, actually, and also looked a little bit in the comment section. We also posted the link to the survey. The survey is still open. So if you are a designer or artist or not only, who is it dedicated to? Is it really to designers, or is it like for everybody who uses ideation techniques?
It is really open to both students and professionals. Mm-hmm. But basically, anyone from the creative industries, that means designers, architects, but it could be illustrators, graphic designers, just name it. Anyone who kind of produces the output in a visual form.
Yeah, so you can still contribute and answer these questions. And yeah, what I kind of take away is really this notion of thinking with your body and this relation to the tangible world. I think this is also really a very empowering thought, because your thinking is not only something that happens inside of you and is not related to the outer world, but it really gives you also the opportunity to change the things out there. And even if it's just a line on a piece of paper, it is already a tangible thing, a real thing that is happening, and that can lead to much more, and really gets processes starting. And also this divergent thinking process of sketching is also something that I find very interesting, also with this comparison to the walking and to this notion of the flaneur that just takes a little bit of a stroll, and he or she really wanders around and see what's coming up. And this is also really related to our research and our process and methodology of art thinking, that also explores these multi-directional ways and not targets the solution, but really wants to open up and go into all these directions. So this is really, really very interesting and valuable for us as well. And there was one comment about the ideation techniques, like the chicken scratch. I really also like this kind of game. Somebody wrote that they played this game also in school.
Yes.
And I also really like this method or this exercise. And I wanted to ask if you have one ideation technique involving sketches or not involving sketches that is your favorite one, maybe.
Yeah, I'll definitely love using the ambiguity as a source. And, we are all doing, the cloud spotting. We are watching clouds and we're looking into forms and shapes in the clouds. And you can easily do something like that when you have an access to computer. Just create a couple of the spots. Use if you're a user of Photoshop or the Affinity Photo, you can create texture brushes. They create those blobs and big shapes and forms. And my favorite part of it, that you can design those brushes. And I call that, it's a kind of provisional name for that. I call that form bashing.
Okay.
So I usually research, let's say, some qualitative terms, like, I want to design something that is elegant and dynamic. These are vague expressions, but you can find, when you just Google out just the visual images, the images that they're somehow related to it.
Okay.
You can find some that is somehow related. Then I just crop them, chop them out, and I build the brush out of it.
Yeah.
Which is really abstract.
Yeah.
But it somehow holds that the aesthetic quality in it. And then I use that brush, to, this is going to be a car, this is going to be a spaceship, this is going to be an airplane, this is going to be a character, whatever. And somehow that kind of the initial aesthetic quality is embedded in the final sketch. But you're still dealing with the ambiguity. So that's my favorite technique, form bashing.
Yeah, ambiguity is also a very important word, I think, and really this process of making decisions in the ideation process, in the sketching process, really describes this very, very well. And on another topic, I wanted to ask you that, or let's say like this, I think it's very interesting to have this, or to get reminded of this wider understanding of sketching, and this, that everybody, the drawing is really thinking, and everybody is using sketches in one way or the other. Even they might not do it consciously, or might not do it, okay, I'm saying I'm a designer, or I'm a visual artist. But a lot of people, if you want to encourage them and say, okay, let's make a sketch, they say, oh no, I can't draw, I don't like it. Do you think there's a possibility, or do you have an idea how we can encourage people to use sketching even though they are not designers?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. And this is, by the way, one of the motivations of my studies, because I do believe that we are overlooking the fact that this is such a powerful way to generate the idea, just sketching itself. But for our education system, and that system really applies on the whole planet, it's nothing really cultural, that much cultural, because I would say this is only Western culture. It is presented in the Asian culture, maybe somehow even more frustrating way, that we're teaching kids that they're so much result-oriented that they forget about the process. And I think we need to encourage, and we need to build in the education system that, the free sketching has the value. And it is nothing to be ashamed, nothing to be shy for, nothing to be kind of that should be hidden. No, these are the natural things to us, and we're just shooting ourselves in our feet if we don't use it. So definitely one of my goals is to come up with a kind of methodology or system that will include a visual ideation. Let's say for a start in the design or architectural education at the secondary and the third level of the education. But maybe in the future, I'm collaborating with a fantastic professor, Dr. Pankova, in one of the universities here in Czech Republic, and she is into creativity of kids. She's researching me for some time. And we have been already discussing how that thing could be implemented on a very basic level.
Okay. Wow, that's really, really interesting and very important. I totally agree that this is something that should come up more in the basic education systems as well as in the grown education, that we get back with and take a pencil in our hands and not only write about our ideas or talk about the ideas, but also draw about our ideas or draw our ideas and think with our hands and our pens in the hand.
The funny thing is, if I can just make a kind of a closing statement for that I said, I'm a strong believer. I'm a techno optimist. I'm not going to hide that. And I do believe that technology can help us even in this case, dealing with the ambiguity and using it to idea development through sketching or through the interaction with that digital content. So I think the technology will play a big role in it as well.
Yeah, that's true. I also have one last question that didn't come via the YouTube comments, but on another channel. And you had this slide up about the sketches or the work you do that is not going to the client, but that you kind of do in the design process, and that it gets more and more in a way. And if design is a process that not only focuses on the results for the client, do we need to educate our clients better? As now talking as a professional designer from the focus point of a professional designer, what do you think? Do you have any recommendations how to do that?
Yeah. I can give you a couple of the stories where I was struggling with that as well. But I learned a few things. I had one specific client who always wanted to see my working sketches. And it was frustrating because sometimes we ended up with something completely different than the intention was. Yeah. But then over the years, because I had a really big ego problem with that, I had my proposal and I wanted to fight for it. And then through the mutual sketching session, we came up with something that was probably better, I must admit today. So that kind of a collaboration between the artist and the client through sketching, it is still the role of a designer or the architect to execute this thing or to develop this thing. But to ideate together, this is extremely efficient. And yes, you're right. Once we will start to kind of talk about the visual ideation as something scientifically explained, so not related to something as esoteric as as the fantasy or talent, then it will be better established as a part of the deal you are having with your client.
Okay, yeah, I get it. So a little bit more communication, a little bit more scientific work and base work that you're laying the groundwork for that at the moment. I heard before that you're still, preparing also for your defensio of the meta sketching. So I think you're very well prepared. It's a super interesting topic. I thank you a lot for this and for sharing this and to give us the insight into that. And also from the audience, I can say thank you. And from all us here at Ars Electronica and Ars Electronica Futurelab, also the home delivery crew that is here with me in the Deep Space 8K. Thanks you and says see you soon. If you have anything, do you have any more last remarks or so? I think we are quite in time. So, or should we
this is just to express how grateful I am.
Yeah.
It was really awesome to be here.
Yeah,
Thank you for the invitation again. And I mean, you guys all in the audience, you know how to Google out. So reach me on Facebook or LinkedIn or anywhere. I'll be more than happy to discuss these things. And getting the feedback from you and your experience is more than valuable for me. This part of the research is not just about digging into the books and science, but it's also getting the stories from you guys, because we want to have a really wide open eyes and to see what's really going on and understand it properly. So thanks again for this opportunity. I'm super happy to be with you, at least virtually. I would prefer to be with you in Linz
we would prefer
have a
too.
Yeah. But that's what it is. So thank you
that's
guys.
what it is.
It's been a pleasure.
So thank you again. I will say it also in the webcam so that I can at least look you in the eye in this way. And thank you to the audience and goodbye.
Bye-bye.